Most rookie quarterbacks beg for a shot. Shadūr Sanders? He barely got a practice. That was the story going around. No first-team reps, no preseason snaps, just a backup buried on the depth chart, until one chaotic NFL Sunday flipped everything we thought we knew. In Cleveland, a city that's been burned by quarterback promises more times than fans can count, it didn't seem like Shadūr was going to be any different. He wasn't even in the conversation. He was running scout team drills, getting tossed in when games were already lost. Another name, another long shot, but then something crazy happened. 1 week of real preparation. One NFL start, one win, and all of a sudden the Browns have a quarterback controversy no one saw coming. Not just because he won rookies can get lucky, but because of how he played. Confident, calm, slinging lasers downfield like he'd been doing this his whole life. Because technically, he has. His last name? Sanders. His father? You already know. So when Shadūr took the field and threw a 52-yard touchdown out of nowhere, it wasn't just a big play, it was a statement. And on the sidelines, Myles Garrett's reaction said everything you need to know. Because when your all-pro leader looks shocked, like he's seeing something for the first time, that's real. I ain't seen nothing like this before. That's what made Cleveland believers pause. That's what made even the doubters look twice. And maybe it's all just momentary hype. Or maybe, just maybe, it's the beginning of something Browns fans haven't had in decades. Hope. But is Shadūr Sanders the real deal? Or did Cleveland just fall in love with another flash that fades? That's what we're unpacking today. Because the journey from backup to QB1 isn't about stats, it's about belief. And right now, Shadūr has a city on the edge of something it hasn't felt in a long time. Curiosity, excitement, possibility. And maybe an answer. Cleveland isn't just another football town. It's one of those rare places where the game is stitched into the soul, where people show up every Sunday through cold winds, heartbreak, and years of maybe next time. But in this city, the quarterback position has become something of a haunted crown. Since 1999, the Browns have started over 40 different quarterbacks. And for fans who have lived through the Tim Couches, the Johnny Manziels, the Brady Quinns, and the Baker Mayfields, hope has started to feel like a cruel joke. Every time a new name shows promise, it collapses in spectacular fashion. There's always just enough of a flash, a big throw, a late-game drive, maybe a surprise win to make you start to believe again. And then, injuries, inconsistency, drama, or just plain disappointment. By the time this season kicked off, Dillon Gabriel was supposed to be the guy. He was the starter. A third-round pick. A smart, accurate, safe pair of hands. But the Browns' offense? It was flat, limited, disconnected. Gabriel was efficient on paper. Sure, 7 touchdowns, only 2 picks, but the offense couldn't move. The team lost 4 of his last 5 starts. To the fans, it felt like watching someone try to drive a Ferrari in first gear. And that's where the frustration really began to boil over. Because on the depth chart sat Shadūr Sanders, a 5th-round pick known more for his last name than for anything he'd done at the pro level so far. A lot of people thought he was a joke, a marketing story, a name-brand backup with 0 NFL experience and a famous dad pulling strings behind the scenes. He wasn't taking reps with the ones, he wasn't running the offense, he was running the scout team, offensively irrelevant. The message was clear, Sanders isn't ready. But that all changed the moment Dillon Gabriel went down with a concussion in Week 11. Suddenly, the Browns had no choice. The rookie, who hadn't even taken real first-team snaps in practice, was thrown into the fire. Forget strategy. Forget prep time. For one game, it was just raw instincts, backyard football, and grit. And the craziest part? He won. The Browns went into Las Vegas and beat the Raiders 24-10 with Sanders under center, and even if the box score didn't scream franchise quarterback, you had to feel it. Shadūr wasn't perfect, 11 of 20 for 209 yards, 1 touchdown and a pick, but he looked like a guy with command. He took just 1 sack behind a below-average line. He pushed the ball downfield. He made defenders miss. And more importantly, his teammates believed. This wasn't just another kid getting lucky with a screen pass touchdown. This was a quarterback walking into a broken situation and flipping the lights on. And Cleveland noticed. Because for once, it didn't feel like another quarterback filling time before the next draft. It felt like something real. something you couldn't explain with analytics or passing charts. It felt like the Browns might have finally stumbled into magic in the mess. Now, no one's engraving his bust in Canton. No one's printing playoff tickets. And no one's pretending that one game makes a career. But in a city tired of false starts and broken blueprints, Shadūr Sanders didn't just win a game. He reopened a conversation. Could this be the guy? Could this be different? Or is Cleveland setting itself up for another emotional gut punch? And that's why this story matters. Not because of who his dad is. Not because of the critics who scoffed. Not even because of what happened in Las Vegas. It matters because for the first time in a long time, Cleveland fans didn't feel embarrassed, disappointed, or bored. They felt interested. And for a franchise that's spent decades in a quarterback identity crisis, that feeling alone is worth paying attention to. Because sometimes, that spark, that one unexpected win, it doesn't mean the problem is fixed, but it might mean it's finally time to actually start watching again. The NFL Draft is supposed to be a celebration, the biggest job interview in sports, watched by millions around the world. It's where stars are born, legacies begin, and futures are rewritten in real time. And for Shadūr Sanders, the script was already written. Or so we thought. He was coming from Colorado under the brightest lights in college football, coached by none other than his father Deion Sanders, and backed by viral highlights, eye-popping stats, and more media coverage than most top 10 prospects. By mid-season of his final college year, outlets were projecting him as a first or second-round talent. Some even labeled him as one of the most naturally gifted throwers in the draft class. He had the name, he had the spotlight, and he had the numbers. So, what happened? Because when draft weekend finally arrived, Shadūr Sanders disappeared. One round passed, then another, then two more. By the time his name was called, it was the 5th round pick, 141. A full-blown fall, with zero explanation. There was no injury, no suspension, no obvious red flag. Just whispers, just speculation. And like most stories in pro football, the truth was buried under layers of opinion. Some insiders claimed teams were scared off by his media presence. Too much attention, too much noise. Others said he was too tightly linked to Deion, and that franchises didn't want the circus that might come with him. They didn't want primetime sitting in the box every week, one agent said privately, even if he's just a dad. But there was something else, too, something a little more complicated. Yes, however you frame it, the NFL is still a league with unspoken patterns, and Shadūr wasn't your typical 5th-round prospect. He had pedigree, he had production, but what he didn't have, according to some scouts, was humility. He's too confident, they said. He's too flashy. He needs to sit and learn. No one said he wasn't talented. No one denied the arm strength. But when draft boards were finalized, he dropped hard. And that's when the second wave of media pressure exploded. Former President Donald Trump even chimed in, not exactly a regular info source in the sports world, declaring on social media that the league had made a mistake by letting Shadūr fall that far. "Great genes, I told you so," he posted after Sanders won his first NFL game. Suddenly, this wasn't just a football story, it was national. In one corner, analysts and fans saying Shadūr was overhyped, untested, and riding his dad's coattails. In the other, a growing chorus of supporters now screaming, "See? They were wrong!" But behind all of that drama, the politics, the press, the projections, was something simpler. The Browns took a chance. No fanfare, no promises. Just a 5th-round flyer on a kid who had every reason to be bitter and every reason to prove them all wrong. That's why this isn't just about talent, it's about motivation. From draft darling to afterthought in just 6 months. From nearly forgotten to forcing his way onto an NFL field. That shift that fall is what gave Sanders the edge. He said it himself after the Raiders win. "A lot of people want to see me fail. It ain't going to happen." And you could feel it not just in his words, but in how he played. Like every throw was personal, like every read had a little extra venom in it, like every drive was a receipt getting checked off. The NFL loves underdog stories. But here's what no one ever says out loud. Rich kids aren't usually allowed to have them. Sanders grew up with advantages. Sure, world-class coaching, spotlight opportunities, and a Hall of Fame dad guiding the way. But none of that kept him from being doubted, dropped, and dismissed. Underdogs don't always come from nowhere. Sometimes, they come from the top and fall fast. All that mattered now was this. Once he hit the NFL, he had no excuses left, no logos to hide behind, no dad to shield him. Just a ball, a field, and the unbelievable pressure of proving half the league wrong while the other half waits for him to fail. And that pressure? It wasn't holding him back. If anything, it was fueling something dangerous. It's one of the worst-kept secrets in football. Backup quarterbacks don't get first-team reps. Not during the season. Not unless the starter's out. The QB room is a hierarchy, and rookies at the bottom, they're glorified observers. That's the world Shadūr Sanders lived in for most of the season. No snaps with the starters, no live reps in practice, just scout teamwork, running other teams' plays against the defense, while the real offense ran business as usual. And that's what made what happened next so wild. Because when Dillon Gabriel went down with a concussion in Week 11, head coach Kevin Stefanski didn't have the luxury of easing a backup in. He didn't get to design a custom playbook or give Sanders a few weeks to ramp up. He had no time. Gabriel's injury cracked the door open, and Sanders was shoved through it. 1 week of practice with the first-team offense. That's it. 1 week. No preseason starts, no rhythm with the receivers, no real in-game chemistry with the O-line. And yet, he made it look like he'd been running that huddle all season. Scout team QB on Monday, starting QB by Sunday, and somehow a winner by sunset. It wasn't just the play calling. It was the manner he was poised in a collapsing pocket, played clean under pressure, and made throws that veterans don't even attempt. Let's be clear, this wasn't a soft debut. He wasn't asked to just hand the ball off and play it safe. Cleveland opened up the offense. Downfield shots, designed rollouts, scramble drills. It was a real game plan, and Shedeur ran it like it was second nature. His stat line? 11 completions, 209 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Not flashy on paper. But the film? That told a totally different story. Because sometimes it's not about numbers. Sometimes it's about your teammates lifting their heads when you walk into a huddle. Sometimes it's about Myles Garrett, your team captain and all-pro pass rusher, looking shook in awe after a throw. That's what happened after Sanders dropped a 52-yard dime across his body on the run, a play that instantly lit up film rooms, highlight reels, and social media feeds. Fans could argue about the numbers all day. But the eyes never lie, and the eyes of the Browns' locker room weren't just impressed. They were re-engaged. Suddenly, the energy was different. The team that looked flat with Gabriel under center, too slow, too mechanical, looked alive. The throws came faster, the routes extended longer, and the deep ball finally mattered again. And look, it wasn't all perfect. Sanders threw an interception, had a couple off-target balls, missed a read or two. But for a kid with barely a week of starter-level practice, he played like someone who'd been waiting not just for a chance, but for revenge. That's what separates a good game from a good sign. Because you can luck into a win, but you don't fake confidence when a 300-pound edge rusher's about to decapitate you and you still manage to escape, roll, right, and fire a laser 30 yards downfield between 2 defenders. That's instinct. That's prep at the subconscious level. That's years of being groomed in pressure, shaped by scrutiny, and finally being told, "Yeah, kid, go prove you belong." He belonged. And the crazy part? No one wanted to give him a real shot, not even his own coaching staff. Because even after the win, Kevin Stefanski barely gave him public praise. There were no big proclamations, no QB1 titles, just vague coach speak. We'll evaluate it. We're just focused on this week. But let's be honest, after that performance, you aren't evaluating anything. You're trying to figure out if a kid you barely prepared just saved your season or at the very least, your quarterback room. Sanders went from invisibility to inevitability in 7 days. And the scariest part for the rest of the league? That might have been him at 20% of his potential. So now the question shifts from, can he hold up? To something way more dangerous. What happens now when you actually build the offense around him? There are moments in football that numbers just don't capture. Stats can tell you a quarterback completed 11 of 20 passes, threw for 209 yards, and had 1 touchdown with 1 interception. Solid, right? But not unforgettable. What they don't show is that one throw that made a franchise freezing in quarterback purgatory suddenly sit upright. They don't measure locker room reactions. They don't have a column for Myles Garrett's face. But that face? That was the moment everything changed. Because in the second half of that win against the Raiders, Shadūr Sanders rolled out to his right, eluding a collapsing pocket, eyes locked downfield as defenders swarmed. And with next to no space, no margin for error, he launched a 52-yard missile into the hands of rookie wideout Isaiah Bond, threading it perfectly between two defenders in tight coverage. Not just a beautiful throw. It was a statement. It was the kind of play you see once or twice a season, not from rookies, not from fifth-rounders, and definitely not from guys who'd only had a few days of work with the starters. And standing on the sideline, Myles Garrett's reaction said more than any coach ever could. His face twisted into a look of pure disbelief. Shock, almost like he didn't know what he just saw. "There's not many guys in the league that can make that throw," Garrett said after the game. "That was a hell of a throw." Now pause. This wasn't coming from a casual. This is Myles Garrett, one of the most dominant defensive players in the NFL. He's seen it all, played against every legend you can name. For him to react like that wasn't hype. That was confirmation. Because throws like that don't just impact the scoreboard, they infect the locker room. You can't coach that level of arm talent or field vision. You can't fake composure while rolling out under blitz pressure. And you can't teach timing those windows without first-team reps. That one moment broke the rookie narrative. Up until then, a lot of people still viewed Sanders as an experiment, a kid with NFL bloodlines trying to carve out a little role. Smart, talented, maybe a developmental piece. After that throw, he was a quarterback, period. And it wasn't just the arm strength. It was the decision-making. He didn't panic, he didn't bail too early, and he didn't lob it with hesitation. He fired it with purpose, as if he knew the exact depth and spacing. Receivers notice that. Veterans notice that. And defenses fear it. Suddenly, the Browns' offense, one that was painfully predictable under Gabriel, had a new identity, one that used the deep field, one that attacked, one that said, "We don't just exist to run clock." Everything shifted. And reviewers? The analysts who had buried Sanders in April? Couldn't ignore it anymore. They rewound the tape. They clipped the play. They slowed it down, realizing how tight the window truly was, and how far Sanders had come from being buried on the depth chart to making the most important throw of the Browns' season so far. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. He wasn't supposed to take the field. He wasn't supposed to make that read. And he damn sure wasn't supposed to deliver that throw. But he did. And in a city that has seen more quarterback duds than it cares to count, one elite throw goes a long way in shaking the scars. That moment made fans dream again, made players believe again. It didn't guarantee anything. He could fail next week. He could struggle with consistency. He could hit a wall. But one thing is now crystal clear. Shedeur Sanders isn't a meme. He's not a novelty act. He's not just Prime's kid. He's a quarterback that made a team stop and think, wait, did we just see the start of something real? In the NFL, how a coach speaks after a game often says more than the scoreboard ever could. So when Kevin Stefanski walked to the podium after Shedeur Sanders' debut win and didn't exactly sound thrilled, it raised more than a few eyebrows. The rookie just snapped a brutal 17-game winless streak for Browns quarterbacks making their first career start. He completed over 50% of his passes, threw for 209 yards, managed the offense with poise, and made one of the best throws of the week. And yet, the head coach's reaction? Proud of him, a lot to improve, just gonna take it 1 week at a time. Translation? Don't get too excited. That's when fans and certain players started to feel a shift. Because when Dillon Gabriel was still the starter weeks earlier, even after ugly losses and slow offensive starts, Stefanski stuck by him with conviction. After defeats, he reaffirmed Gabriel's place at QB1, told the media he was our guy, and didn't leave much room for speculation. But after a win with Shedeur, suddenly it was all coach speak. No momentum, no buzz, no official starter title, just deliberate caution. That felt a lot like avoidance. And for a team that has finally witnessed something different, something promising, that silence stuck out like a sore thumb. It's one thing to temper expectations. It's another to snuff out momentum. Because here's what really matters. Players notice these things. They watch how a locker room responds. They watch how a coach handles the microphone when a quarterback delivers. And they know the difference between professionalism and passive-aggressive hesitation. That's why the post-game energy didn't feel right. Instead of a rallying moment around a young QB stepping up, you had defensive players showing more excitement publicly than the coaching staff. Myles Garrett was pumping Sanders up in interviews. The media was buzzing. And yet, the man calling the offense? He sounded no different than he had after a loss. Some speculated it's just Stefanski's personality, that he's a stoic guy who never gets too high or too low. Others wondered if it was something deeper. Was this hesitancy about performance? Or was it about pride? Because look at it from the staff's perspective. Sanders wasn't their pick. He wasn't groomed to take over. He wasn't part of their original plan. He was essentially the emergency backup thrown into the fire because they had to, not because they wanted to. And when he delivered, that wasn't a coaching win. That was a player saving face, maybe even complicating things. Because now, Stefanski has a dilemma. Stick with the kid and admit he may have overlooked something, or downplay it and avoid the QB controversy altogether. But when your own players are visibly frustrated by how leadership handles success, that's where the cracks start to show. One analyst pointed out how Stefanski used one phrase after the win: "We're just evaluating week to week." But when Gabriel lost games earlier in the season, there was never a whisper of a week-to-week evaluation. He was the guy, period. So why the shift now? Fans saw it. The media saw it. And even inside the locker room, you could feel it. The kid earned the keys and got a pat on the head instead. It's not just about affirmation. It's about leadership, and in a young locker room, how your coach responds after a win sets the tone for what's next. And when people like Myles Garrett, not exactly a media loudmouth, are going to bat for your quarterback harder than your head coach, that's not subtle, that's a signal. "That throw was one of the best I've ever seen," Garrett said. "Not many guys in the league make that. I hope he keeps growing." Compared to Stefanski's dry, "We'll see," it was clear who was more convinced about the performance. And like most things, in football, moments like this aren't forgotten. They don't show up on stat sheets, but they sneak into locker room dynamics, team chemistry, and whether or not your best players actually believe in where things are headed. For now, Stefanski's playing it safe. Maybe he doesn't want a full-blown QB controversy, but if he's not careful, he may end up with something even worse. A locker room divided between the guy making plays and the guy making decisions. Let's be real, if this were just about stats, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. Shadūr Sanders didn't put up MVP numbers in his debut. His stat line wasn't magical. 11 completions, 209 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. It was good, better than expected, but not jaw-dropping on paper. But in context, it wasn't just a solid rookie performance, it was a breakthrough. And what matters more than the numbers was the feeling that came with it. Because for the first time in weeks, maybe months, the Browns' offense actually looked awake. They looked capable. They looked dangerous. That kind of shift doesn't show up in fantasy stats. It shows up in body language, energy. It shows up when a locker room full of guys that's used to grinding through close losses suddenly acts like something just clicked. And it started because Sanders didn't play scared. He took a hit, got back up, made a mistake, corrected it mid-game, trusted his arm, fed his playmakers, dodged pressure, and refused to shrink in the moment. That's not normal for a guy who basically had 5 days to prepare. And when he talked after the game, he didn't sound like a wide-eyed kid happy to survive. He sounded like a quarterback who expected to win. "A lot of people want to see me fail," Sanders told reporters, locking eyes with the camera. "It ain't going to happen. Not, I hope to keep improving. Not just doing what I can. No cliche. No false humility. Just raw confidence and focus." And whether you love him or hate him, that edge is the reason he's even in this position. Because if we're telling the truth, Shedeur Sanders was written off by a huge part of the NFL community before he ever took a snap. Fell to the 5th round, ignored in the summer, buried on the depth chart, treated like an afterthought. And now, just one start into his career, he's changed the entire outlook of a franchise starving for a future quarterback to believe in. This wasn't just a win. This was a spark. It's still early, sure, but look around. The media hasn't stopped talking. Players are hyped. National headlines are following his story. And even former President Trump jumped in postgame on Truth Social, posting, "Great genes, I told you so." Love or hate, the politics that moment kicked Shedeur's story out of the local Cleveland spotlight and onto the national stage. Suddenly, this isn't just about football anymore. It's about pressure, legacy, and potential. It's about whether the son of a legend can go from backup to franchise leader in a football city that spent 2 decades getting crushed by its own quarterback decisions. It's also about something more subtle, but just as powerful. Swagger. That unteachable belief that's either real or fake. And you can't fake it at this level. Shadūr Sanders has it. Always has. But now, that confidence is backed by something real. Production. Proof. A win. The kind of performance that makes you stop and think, what happens if this wasn't an anomaly? What if this is the beginning of something? Because the Browns don't just have a quarterback issue. They have a franchise identity issue. They've burned through system after system, coach after coach, arm after arm, and nothing has stuck. And now, out of nowhere, this kid who wasn't supposed to be ready, who was ignored, criticized, overlooked, walks onto the field and delivers like a veteran. That's bigger than touchdown stats or how many completions he threw. That's belief, reborn. And in Cleveland, after 2 decades of heartbreak, belief might be the most valuable thing Shedeur Sanders has brought to the table. The win against the Raiders was impressive, no question. But now, the fairy tale ends, and the stress test begins. Because this Sunday, Shedeur Sanders won't be facing a bottom-tier team with a leaky defense. He'll be squaring off against one of the most complete, vicious, and battle-hardened squads in football, the San Francisco 49ers. They're faster. They hit harder. They disguise coverages. And they don't do rookie forgiveness. The 49ers are everything the Raiders weren't. Where Vegas collapsed under pressure, San Francisco brings it by the truckload. They run exotic blitz packages, they rotate pass rushers, and they punish any QB who holds the ball too long, especially rookies. This is the kind of team that exposes weaknesses and reveals who's ready and who's just hot for a moment. And that's exactly why this game matters more than stat sheets can ever explain. It's not about whether Shedeur throws for 300 yards. It's not about fantasy points, or highlight reels, or viral throws across his body. It's about this. Can he handle the heat when everything goes wrong? Can he stay composed when the pocket collapses over and over again? Can he make the right decisions, not just the flashy ones? Against the Raiders, Sanders had moments of clean protection. He had lanes, he had options. Against the Niners, not a chance. The pocket will collapse. His timing will be tested. And any hesitation will end in sacks or worse. This is what the NFL calls a reality check game. But it could also be something far more powerful. A narrative shifting, locker room cementing, national mind-changing moment. See, if Shedeur goes out there and falls apart, fine. He's a rookie. Everyone moves on. But if he stands tall, even in a loss, if he makes reads, extends plays, and keeps the Browns competitive against a Super Bowl-level defense, that's no longer just potential. That's legitimacy. Because, let's be honest, flash-in-the-pan quarterbacks happen all the time. A few nice throws, 1 or 2 decent halves, and the hype resets. But earning respect in the trenches against elite competition, that sticks. The 49ers defense isn't just about pressure. It's psychological. They disguise. They bait. They hunt tendencies. Sanders isn't just facing 11 players. He's walking into a chess match that could determine whether his rise continues or plateaus. And now, the pressure's doubled. Because it's not just about proving he's better than Dillon Gabriel. Now the league is watching. Media, scouts, front offices. Even players around the league have started whispering, wait, is this kid actually like that? And here's the Browns' reality. They're out of playoff contention. They're looking at another long offseason of trying to figure out who they are. And what they can't afford to do is face another offseason not knowing who their quarterback is. If Shedeur plays well, win or lose, that gives Cleveland the gift they've rarely had. Clarity. It informs whether they need to burn another pick on a QB in 2026. It tells the front office whether to target a veteran. It helps the coaching staff figure out whether they're building something or just surviving another reset. And most importantly, it tells the locker room whether they have a guy they can go to war for. Because teams don't just follow arms, they follow attitudes. And every week, Sanders stays in control, stands in the fire, and keeps swinging. That attitude becomes something the whole team begins to rally behind. One great throw made teammates turn their heads. But this week, he doesn't need a highlight. He just needs to earn their faith. All over again. The Raiders game was the prologue. This next matchup against the 49ers? That's Chapter 1. Welcome to the deep end. QB1. Do we have our quarterback? It's the question the Browns have failed to answer for 2 straight decades. They've tried everything: draft picks, trades, veterans, high-upside rookies, safe game managers, and even a few desperation signings. The result? More instability under center than any NFL franchise since 1999. 40-plus starters, countless resets, endless pain. And if we're being honest, fans aren't just tired, they're numb. That's what made Shadūr Sanders' performance and everything swirling around it feel bigger than just a good game. It felt like someone kicking down the door of Cleveland's quarterback identity crisis and saying, "Look at me, I'm different." And what the Browns decide to do now, after that breakthrough, will say everything about who they really are as a franchise. Because here's the thing, the Browns are 3-8. The playoffs aren't a realistic conversation. This season isn't about chasing a miracle. It's about figuring out what you're building toward next year and beyond. Which makes this moment critical. Are you building around the future? Or are you still babysitting the past? Because yes, Dillon Gabriel is healthy again. He cleared concussion protocol. He started the season as the guy. And he's fine. He's smart, he's accurate. He hasn't turned the ball over much. But in 6 starts this season, the Browns were 1-4 with him under center. The offense was cautious, predictable. It moved like molasses, too safe, too slow, too easy to game plan for. Fans saw it. Players felt it, and now they've seen something drastically different. Clarity doesn't always come in the form of dominance. Sometimes it comes through contrast. And that's exactly what Shadūr Sanders has given this team. There's zip on his throws, depth in his reads, fluidity in his movement, swagger in his presence. He gets the ball out quick, delivers it deep, and more importantly, he moves the chains. But here's where this gets tricky. NFL politics don't always favor the hot hand. They favor the investment. Gabriel was a 3rd-round pick. He came with expectations, ties to the coaching staff's vision. Shedeur, 5th-rounder, wild card, a bonus arm. But football doesn't care about draft status. The locker room definitely doesn't. Players follow production and momentum. And right now, Sanders has both. So imagine the signal it would send if, after reinvigorating the offense, beating the Raiders, and showing clear raw upside, Shedeur got quietly sent back to the bench. What do you tell the team? Forget the win. Forget how he played. Let's go back to the guy who scores 17 points a game. It wouldn't just be tone deaf. It would be malpractice. Because you don't stumble across lightning like this often. You don't get second chances at a potential quarterback of the future without giving him a real stretch of games to prove it. And whether he balls out or struggles in the next few weeks, one thing is clear. He deserves to show you exactly what he is. Not just one start, but a full-look evaluation. Otherwise, you're not just wasting games. You're wasting a window into a possible future you prayed for but never actually expected to find. This Sunday is more than just a test against a great defense. It's a front office evaluation tool, a live audition. Because this offseason, the Browns will have to decide, do they ride into 2026 with Sanders as the guy? Do they go all in for another quarterback in the draft? Or do they burn more cap space trying to lure a stopgap veteran? The answers to those questions don't come through guesswork. They come from live reps. From letting the kid struggle, succeed, grow, and show what he truly is. And right now, he's giving them something Gabriel never did. Hope. Not just he might win us a game hope, but this guy could be it. Hope. The kind of hope Cleveland hasn't had since, well, maybe ever. Now, the Browns are on the clock. If they believe in accountability, production, and what their own eyes and players are telling them, Sanders stays on that field. If not, they risk more than just losing games. They risk losing the locker room, losing the fan base, and missing their best chance in 20 years to finally have an answer under center. When Shedeur Sanders jogs out of that tunnel next Sunday, he won't just be wearing the number 12. He'll be carrying decades of disappointment. He'll be carrying a franchise that's cycled through names, faces, and failures under center since 1999. A city that's paid for every ounce of belief with heartbreak and yet still shows up every Sunday. Cleveland doesn't ask for much, just someone to believe in, someone who doesn't flinch, someone who plays with poise, someone who looks like they belong. And after one wild, unexpected, thrown-together week, that's exactly what Shedeur Sanders gave them. Not perfection, not heroics, but possibility. That maybe, just maybe, this isn't another recycled headline. That maybe, this time, the story doesn't end the same way. Because everything about his rise breaks the usual NFL mold. He wasn't handed the job. He didn't get the reps. He didn't have the coaching staff lining up to promote him. There was no long-term strategic plan to bring him along slowly. There was just a door cracked open when the starter got hurt. A week of practice. One game. And then a spark. Now, we're here. Week 13, against one of the best defenses in football. In front of fans who've learned not to trust too easily. With the weight of a franchise's future quietly balancing on one shoulder. This isn't college anymore. This isn't hype anymore. This isn't his father's legacy anymore. This is the league. This is the moment. This is the crossroads. And as difficult as the next game will be, one thing's already clear. Shadūr belongs here. What isn't clear, not yet, is whether the Browns are ready to build around that. Whether this organization has the patience, courage, and awareness to realize that finding potential in the middle of a lost season is a gift. A rare one. One you don't bench. Not now. Because yeah, rookies get figured out, defenses adjust, mistakes happen. Learning curves hit hard, but if Sanders can show poise again against a real defense, if he can prove that what happened in Las Vegas wasn't a fluke but a foundation, then we may be watching something that Browns fans have waited a generation to finally see. Not the beginning of another quarterback cycle, not another letdown waiting to happen, but the first true chapter of something sustainable, of something real. A quarterback with swagger, talent, and presence. One who doesn't fold under pressure. One who can win over a locker room in a week. And maybe, just maybe, one who can finally take a city starved for answers and give them one worth believing in. So when Shadūr Sanders steps onto that field this Sunday, he's not just facing the 49 years. He's facing every doubt that's followed his name since the moment it entered the league, every whispered criticism, every rep he didn't get, every scout who labeled him too raw, too loud, too connected, too confident. Every roadblock will be on that field with him. And now, one performance in, he's earned the right to keep answering the questions on his terms, with his arm, in real time, against real pressure. One win doesn't make a career, but sometimes one moment can start a new one. And maybe, just maybe, Cleveland's long search doesn't end with another question mark. It ends with a name on the back of a jersey, a number on the field, and a fan base finally saying the one thing it hasn't in 25 years. We found our guy.